Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishna Jagatgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. So we were discussing the condition of Jairam Bhatti when Holy Mother was born, and as a young child, the amount of difficulty, the type of difficulty she had to face, not only the elders of that village, but even children had to overcome a lot of difficulties because there was no market in Jairambati. It was a very, very small village, and most of the villagers were self-sufficient because their needs were few. So naturally, they lived with bare minimum. Most of the families, there were a few a barber's family, a blacksmith family, some confectioners, some sweet meat makers, and some people sold milk from the cows they owned. And maybe there were a few grocery shops. That's all. So it was a very pretty small village where Holy Mother was born. Jairambati was even smaller than Kamarpukur, which was 10 miles away from Jairambati. And since there was no market, they had to travel to Kotalpur, not Kamarpukur, but Kotalpur was a slightly bigger place where there was a small, Kotalpur was a small town. So to buy clothes or even salt, spices, the oil for the lamp, kerosene, matchboxes, everything for practically everything other than simple groceries, the utensils and other things, they had to go to Kotalpur, which was 9 miles away. So you can imagine you have to go there by bullock cart or walk all the way. So they could buy sweets and groceries in either Kamarpukur or some other places which were just 6 miles away. But if they wanted something, uh, some major purchase to be made like clothes and other things, they had to go to Kotalpur. So there was a small pond, a big, I mean, it's not a very small pond, but quite a big, but not a lake, a pond which is known as Banerjee's Pond. So the villagers used this pond for bathing, for cooking, and for drinking water. I don't know whether they used filters or not, but they had to practically live on these. There was no system of wells. Mostly they used to use the water from these ponds for everything, practically everything. So now, to the west of the village, to the west of the village is a big lake, which is now known as Mother's Lake, which used to irrigate. There were a few lakes which were big, and they used to be used. The water of those lakes would be used to irrigate the village fields. And a small pond was there, which is known as Punyapukur, which was at the center of the village. If you visit rural Bengal, you will find that every small village has lot of ponds, small ponds, big ponds. The big ponds would be used for bathing, cooking, and drinking, and the other smaller ponds, people used to take water, filter it, and drink it, and sometimes use it for cultivation of fish and other things. So this Punyapukur was a small, Punya means uh, religious merit. That is what Punya is. It is opposed to sin, the religious merit that you acquire by doing good actions. It is known as Punyapukur. Punya. Pukur means a pond. So Punyapukur was a small pond, which is still there. If you go to Jairambati, of course, they have built ghats and other things. So Holy Mother's house, that is her parents' house, was located to the west of Punyapukur. And there was another small pond known as Kalupukur. So the people of Jairambati in general, so this is the location. It's a very, very small village. it was a small village. Even today, if you go there, but because the center of the Ramakrishna mission and the temple has come up, there are a lot of market, lot of visitors come from all over the world. So the town has become quite big. It has several schools and other things now. But in those days, I'm talking of nearly 163, 165 years ago, the people of Jairambati, just to give you an idea, what is the type of environment in which Holy Mother uh, was not only born, but she spent her childhood. Because even after her marriage, in those days, child marriage was very common. Even after her marriage to Sri Ramakrishna, it was not until she was nearly 16 years old that she got an opportunity to go to Dakshineshwar. So Sri Ramakrishna was practically in Dakshineshwar all the time, and she was living with her parents in Jairambati. So the general people of Jairambati were either poor or middle class. Unlike some prosperous villages in the neighborhood like Vishnupur and other places, which were connected by train, and the last stop was perhaps Vishnupur or some other station, Tarkeshwar. From there they had to either walk, several miles of walk will take you to Jairambati or Kamarpukur. So it was very difficult. It's not as easy as it is today to even go to Calcutta, Dakshineshwar. For Sri Ramakrishna, things were much easy because there were carriages, there were a lot of modes of transport available in Kolkata, even in those days. It was a very modern city compared to these rural places, which were not connected except for some major stations, major towns, which were connected by railway. So train was the only option. If you had to go quickly, you had to come to either Tarkeshwar or Vishnupur. They were all connected by train, and then you had to walk. So now coming back to Jairambati, it was, as I said, a small village full of either poor people who earned a living by selling cows' milk and maybe whatever they grew, they used to consume it themselves. As we will see, Sri Ma Sharda Devi's father had enough stock to feed people during famine. During famine, people were used to suffer a lot. So it was a self-sufficient village. People had very few needs, but they were very devout. The religious festivals, the performance of religious plays, recitals from Hindu mythology, kirtan, devotional singing. Bauls are people who are wandering minstrels. They will, just for a little food, they go from village to village, and that is how the spiritual ideas of our scriptures and the local uh, literature, they were spread through word of mouth. So the daily monotony, there were no other avenues for entertainment like people had in the cities, like in people had in Calcutta, because of the influence of the colonial rule. But the Western culture had not yet reached these villages, though they were hardly a few 50, 60 miles away from Kolkata. But still, they were pretty much isolated from the impact or from the effect of the modern culture, the Western culture, you can say. We cannot generalize it as a Western culture, but we can say that the modern materialistic culture had not impacted the innocent people of these villages. So their only contact or the only type of education was through this performance of religious plays. That was a great system where people could communicate these spiritual ideas. They were easily accessible. Now, in spite of all the communication that we have, all the internet and all those things, the common people of the village are not able to access as naturally and through direct contact these wonderful religious or spiritual ideas. So everything that was a pastime, just for a few morsels of food. These bowls, they were good singers. They were naturally talented. The Baul Sangeet, if you hear the Baul songs, they're wonderful compositions. Through the medium of music, they used to spread these wonderful spiritual ideas. So everybody, though he was illiterate, they could not read or write. Most of the people, since there were no good schools, people could hardly read or write. They just learnt enough, or they had to go to bigger towns to learn, to even go to school. But there were plenty of temples. You see, even in a school, even in a small town like Jairambati, though there was no good school where boys and girls found it more difficult to learn. Though Holy Mother was very keen to learn. In fact, even when she went to Dakshineshwar, Sri Ramakrishna arranged for, because it was against the orthodox tradition of those days, that girls were hardly allowed to go to school. It was only the boys, and even the boys, the literacy rate was very low in such villages. So the basic minimum schooling also was not accessible to these young girls. They were married off at a very early age, so there's no question of high school and other things. So anyway, but there was this oral education which they got through this religious plays, recitals, kirtan, the devotional bowls, who used to practically visit their village and just ask for a few morsels of food, because that was their livelihood, to spread culture and spread spiritual values to all the families. And they would give it free of cost, just expecting a little food. That's all. They did not even ask for money. So that was the great tradition, the great culture that enabled great ideas not to die out, and the great ideas from the scriptures which found their expression through the Baul songs, local, I mean, local stories. You know, most of these stories were based on the ancient scriptures. There was a Bengali version of Mahabharata, there was a Bengali version of Ramayana, and there were so many versions based on the Puranic stories in the local language. And these Bauls and the other people were very good at that, and they used to travel, and very often they used to stay in small rooms which were attached to the temples. So there was a priest for each of these temples, and there were four, even in those days, there were four temples in that small village. Now, of course, we have Holy Mother's temple uh, in her birthplace, a very big temple which was built by Swami Sharadanandji. But before that, there were four temples. The presiding deity, every village had a presiding deity. So they used to worship, all the villages would go there, and that was goddess Simha Vahini. Literally, Simha Vahini means the mother who has a lion as her vehicle. So in our spiritual tradition, in our Puranic culture, every deity, every god or goddess has a particular animal or something else, bird, as the Vahana. Vahana means one who supports. That way people used to, these stories were built around these Vahanas, and the Vahanas, the animals, got a kind of respect. The lion was respected because he was the Vahana, or he was the carrier of the Divine Mother Durga. So even the names were given in such a way that the moment you saw a lion, or maybe even a rat, a simple rat is a Vahana of Ganesha. Then there are other peacocks, you have owls. Even the owls are Lakshmi, the goddess of prosperity or the goddess of fate. She has for her Vahana or vehicle, a carrier, an owl. So even the owls, normally people think of owls as uh, not as a noble or a nice bird, or even the jackals and the others, they are vahanas of some, even crocodiles. of the different aspects of Divine Mother, they are these Vahanas. So Simha Vahini is a temple, a famous temple even today. They say the mud, the soil that is there, it has certain medicinal properties. So, and even Holy Mother believed that. Even today, you'll find people collecting a little dust from that ground just in front of the Simha Vahini temple. There is a big uh, enclosure where people just they do all the rituals there, and that little soil or little mud is taken by people, and when they fall sick, they take it as medicine. They have so much faith in this Simha Vahini. So in her temple, she has the main Simha Vahini is flanked by two deities, two mothers, two aspects of the Divine Mother. One is Chandi and the other is Mahamaya. So this most of the Shakti or the Shiva temples, they will have other deities. There very often we have in a Rama temple there will be Sita, there will be Lakshman, sometimes there will be Hanuman. So most of the deities, the main deity will have two companions, especially the Divine Mother. Sometimes she has two or more companions. But in this Simha Vahini temple, Chandi is one aspect of the Divine Mother, and it's in fact the whole scripture, Devi Mahatmyan, is also known as Chandi in Bengali. So Chandi is one of the aspects of the Divine Mother, and there is Mahamaya. Mahamaya is another deity. There are so many names of the Divine Mother. So Simha Vahini means Durga. She will be the presiding deity of the town of the village Jairambati, and then she was flanked on both sides. So that is the main temple. But there was another temple which was located in the southeast corner of the village. In the southeast corner, there was a small temple which was known, the goddess is known as Shitala. So Shitala is another goddess, and Sri Ma Sharada Devi's family, her father was a Brahmin. He worshipped at this temple. He was the pujari or the priest of this temple. So in autumn, Durga Puja would be held in this Shitala temple, and many people, worship of Durga, the ceremonial worship of Durga in image, would take place in this Shitala temple. So many people from other villages also, nearby villages. Simha Vahini was a famous temple, so normally a lot of people used to come, and then they used to visit the Shitala temple also. So whatever they got as a priest of this temple, people would often contribute something. Most of the money would be spent in offerings and maintaining the temple. The rest of it would be given to the priest who is conducting all the worship. So that was the only source of income, apart from a little land which they had, and where they would cultivate rice and other paddy and other things, which would be sufficient, which would be stored and would be sufficient for the whole year. Unless there was a famine, people were self-sufficient. Their needs were few, and whatever little extra income they got by either selling cows milk or any other product, agricultural product that they could grow, with that they had to buy things, go 9 miles away by walk or by bullock cart, and buy things for their sustenance, and the needs were really few. So it was a very frugal life that Holy Mother lived. And there were two other temples. Most of the temples even today, now of course they have buildings. They have not buildings, they have a concrete structure, but in those days thatched huts were used as temples. One was dedicated to Lord Sundara Narayana. Sundar means beautiful, the beautiful form of Narayana, which was actually Sri Ma Sharada Devi's ancestral deity. Though her father worshipped in the Shitala temple, their family deity was Lord Sundara Narayana. And the other temple, the fourth temple, was in a hut. Of course, even that was in a hut, and it was dedicated to Mother Kali. But later on, when Holy Mother was about a few years old, this Mother Kali temple was, the puja there was discontinued, and this was used as a children's school, and Kali worship was discontinued. So only 3 temples were there. But on the west side of the village, just outside the village, or maybe the part of the village, there were 2 temples. It's very interesting to know Jatra Siddhi, the temples of Jatra Siddhi, that is, I'll explain what it is, and Dharma Thakur, Veerakanta Dharma Thakur. Dharma Thakur is very strange. Why Dharma Thakur? Dharma means, when the Buddhist influence was there in India, later on, of course, Buddhism practically vanished from India. Only a few Buddhists remained, but most of the Buddhists spread to other Far East countries. They went to China, Japan, Thailand, even Sri Lanka. So somehow the revival of Vedic religion resulted in these Dharma temples being taken over. They were started initially, perhaps Dharma is worshipped as the religious teachings of Buddhism are known as Dhamma, Dhammapada or Dharma. Dhamma is in Pali, Dharma is in Sanskrit. So Veerakanta Dharma Thakur means God. So this Jatra Siddhi means when people went on long pilgrimages, they used to worship at this Jatra. Jatra means to travel. So people were very much worried because those days traveling was so difficult. To go to a pilgrimage to Banaras, you practically had to walk by foot, sometimes go by train if you didn't have money. Sri Ramakrishna's father traveled all the way to Kanyakumari, to Rameshwaram. That's what they say. It would have taken at least a year to go and come back. And on the way, you had to just beg for food. And if you are lucky enough, you don't fall sick, you come back safe. Otherwise, when people used to take leave of the village and go on long pilgrimages, they would worship this Jatra Siddhi, and so that they come back safe. Very often they would not return, especially when people were old. They took it for granted that perhaps they would spend their last days in Banaras or some such places of pilgrimage. So that was the tradition. But anyway, Dharma Thakur was worshipped, and they say perhaps it's a reminder that Dhamma was worshipped. Buddhist also introduced the idea of temple. It is very strange, but most of the temples in India, the Hindu temples I mean, are post-Buddhistic. The Buddhist viharas, the Buddhist structures, which they don't call them temples, but they were part of, there are so many places where Buddha they started worshipping Buddha himself, though Buddha never left instructions for his own worship. But a lot of structures were constructed, which were later on converted into Hindu temples, because when Buddhism left India, most of these temples, so perhaps this was Dharma Thakur was the Dharma which was worshipped, or maybe it is a way of worshipping religion. Dharma means religion. So the personification of noble ideas which constitute our Hindu Dharma, even that may be the reason why it is known as Dharma Thakur. But people do not, people also say that it may be an idea which was borrowed from Buddhism. However, the villagers of Jairambati did not just visit their own temples, these 4 temples. For example, on Shivratri day, on special spring festivals like Shivratri, which normally is considered to be a spring festival, they would go to a nearby temple, which is a famous temple of Shantinath Shiva, a temple in Shihor, which is the birthplace of Hridayaram, the nephew of Sri Ramakrishna. He belonged to this Shihor. So Shihor is nearer to Jairambati than even Kamarpukur. It is on the way. So it's not on the way, but it's nearer. And there on special spring festivals like Shivratri, people from Jairambati would all go to the temple in Shihor where there would be 24 hours Kirtan, Shiva Sankirtan. All the songs on Shiva and the Divine Mother would be sung. So now we come, this is how, as far as the background or the environment in Jairambati nearly 165 years ago when Holy Mother was born. But how was Jairambati connected to Calcutta? We have to know that, because our Holy Mother very often traveled and the situation did not change much. Even though she was born in 1863, 1853, still when she passed away in 1910, the situation was practically the same. The same trains used to, but only maybe there was a little, the roads were practically the same. They had to go by bullock cart or walk all the way. And on the way, there were places where they could rest, dharmashalas as they are known, places where they could just take some rest, because it was not possible to cover the distance from the nearest station, say Tarkeshwar or any other station, and come to Jairambati on the same day. So sometimes they had to take shelter in some places, rest houses on the way. So in the latter part of the 19th century, if you see, this is the period when the whole divine play of Sri Ramakrishna, Srima Sharda Devi and Swami Vivekananda took place. Most of them, 1853, 1836 Sri Ramakrishna was born, 1853 Srima Sharda Devi was born, 1863 Swami Vivekananda was born. And though he passed away, Sri Ramakrishna entered into Mahasamadhi in 1886. Swami Vivekananda little later, 1902. But Holy Mother outlived both of them. She survived both of them and lived up to 1910. So it was practically the second part of the 19th century when the divine play of Sri Ramakrishna, Srima Sharda Devi and even Swami Vivekananda was enacted. So maybe a few years after, in the 20th century, Swami Vivekananda lived for just 2 years, and then 10 years of Holy Mother's life. So practically they all, the major portion of their life was spent in the latter part of the 19th century. So during that time, it was so difficult to reach Calcutta from either Kamarpukur or Jairambati. And they say the journey took nearly 4 days. What takes just 3 or 4 hours now by motor car or by any other means. Even buses go very fast now. What takes just 3 days used to take 3 hours now takes 3 or 4 days sometimes. So people generally, they used to make a journey from Jairambati or Kamarpukur to Calcutta in a group, because there were extensive meadows on the way and secluded roads, and they were infested with bandits. One such bandit, was, in fact, he came to rob this group, and Holy Mother spoke so nicely that the bandit king, the father of the main bandit who had come to rob, in fact, he ended up giving shelter to Sarada, Ma Sarada was very young, and she just addressed him as father. And immediately the head of the bandits, who was there with his wife, they felt such a strange kind of fatherly affection for Sarada, because she had lost her way and the others had left her behind. So she was given shelter, and then on the next day, because she was sick, this bandit, this highway robber, as they were known, this highway robber and his wife, they all went and dropped her to Dakshineshwar, Calcutta. So very often these travelers between Jairambati and Calcutta had to walk 64 miles and cross 5 rivers. 5 rivers means normally there were no bridges, obviously. They had to cross it by paying a small sum to the boatmen. They had to wait for the boat. Then if they are lucky, they would get the boat. But they had to cross 5 rivers from Jairam Bati to Calcutta. Amodar was the first river, then Dwarkeshwar, Mundeshwari, Damodar, and then the Ganges. Of course, you have to cross the Ganges to go to Calcutta because Jairam Bati was on the other side of the Ganges. So Ganga also had to be crossed, of course, by boat, but that was the means of transport. So those who were rich and who were weak or sick could afford expense and who could afford to pay, they would travel by a palanquin or took a train from Bardwan, nearly 34 miles from Jairambati. So from Bardwan, there was a train directly to Kamarpukur. So if they had money, if they could afford it, they would go by train, but at least 34 miles they had to travel, either by bullock cart or palanqui is a, a sort of vehicle. It's not a vehicle, it doesn't have wheels, it is carried by four people, strong four people. It was very common in those days. So old women and old men also, sometimes who could not walk, they would be taken by palanquin and they would be helped to cross. Maybe somebody else would take over. So there was this system of traveling by palanquin, and from Bardwan, then they used to go by train to Calcutta. That was one option. Otherwise, you have to walk all the way. Sometimes you had to walk and then cross the 5 rivers by boat and then finally reach Dakshineshwar or Calcutta. So now the road takes you just 3 hours at the most. So the distance between Kamarpukur and Jairambati is not 10 miles, but 10 kilometers, which is almost, say, 4 or 5 miles. It's a little less than 10 kilometers. So that is how they used to travel. Now we will come to the divine birth of Sri Ma Sharda Devi. This was as far as the geographical location of Jairambati and its distance from Calcutta, where these were the two places, Jairambati, Kamarpukur in the rural Bengal and Calcutta in the urban area where Holy Mother's divine play took place. So that's why we began with a small description of how there was this difference, how Calcutta was different from Kamarpukur, Jairambati, and how difficult it was to travel. It took 3-4 days to walk 64 miles or at least 30 miles, and the rest of it, 34 miles, would be, if one had money, they could go by train. So we begin the second chapter, which is the divine birth of Sri Ma Sharda Devi, begins with a beautiful verse. It is the first verse of the poem, which was composed by Swami Abhedanand. He was a great Sanskrit scholar, as all of you know. So one day he composed this and read it out before Holy Mother herself. And when she heard it, she went into a deep ecstasy and she blessed Abhedananda, who was known as Kali Maharaj. And he said, Saraswati will be on your tongue. So she blessed him. Saraswati is the goddess of knowledge. So this blessing of Holy Mother enabled Swami Abhedananda to preach extensively in the West, first in England and then America. He established many small centers, in the sense small groups. He organized a lot of groups and visited a lot of institutions, universities, and made a lot of friends among the intellectual circles, both in England, Europe, and also America. So this Swami Abhedananda has composed a beautiful hymn. The first verse of that hymn, Prakritim Paramam Abhayam Varadam Nararupa Dharam Janatapaharam Sharanagata Sevaka Tosha Karim Pranamami Param Jananim Jagatam. So it's a beautiful verse to be, and after hearing that, Holy Mother was very much she was so pleased because this whole stotra, Prakritim Paramam, describes the entire life and message and the significance of the divine birth of Holy Mother. Why did she come? What was uh, her divine play about? Why did she come? She was not just a wife of Sri Ramakrishna, as many people term her to be. She was a spiritual consort who not only outlived in Sri Ramakrishna by 34 years, from 1886 to 1910, but not only that, but she played a major role in the dissemination of knowledge, the spiritual knowledge or the wonderful universal truths of which Sri Ramakrishna came to share with everybody all over the world. She did in her own way, very quietly, and inspiring a large number of people, both monks and lay devotees. And it was this particular role which she played, which was nicely summarized in this beautiful uh, hymn on Holy Mother. It is sung normally on special days. In some of the centers, uh, it is recited at the end of, in Jairambati at least, it is every day Prakritim Paramam Abhayam Varadam is recited. Otherwise, normally in the Arti or Vesper service, Khandana is Khandana Bhava Bandhana, which was a hymn which was written in a highly Sanskritized Bengali by Swami Vivekananda, dedicated to Sri Ramakrishna. Though the word Sri Ramakrishna does not come in Khandana, it is to the universal truth that was Sri Ramakrishna, personification of the universal truth. So, Khandana is a universal prayer, which was, of course, dedicated to Sri Ramakrishna. And then we have Om Reem Ritam, which is another composition of Swami Vivekananda, which, if you see the first alphabets of all the different verses, it reads as Om Namo Bhagavate Ramakrishnaya. So that whole mantra has been condensed, as it were, has been expanded. Each letter, each alphabet is taken. Om Namo Bhagavate Bhaga. So each of the stanzas, they begin with these alphabets, and that is how the whole hymn to the divinity of Sri Ramakrishna, it's known as the hymn. That is, of course, totally in Sanskrit. Though Khandana Bhavabandhana is in Bengali, Sanskritized Bengali, most of the words are derived from Sanskrit, except for a few words which are originally Bengali. But otherwise, practically it is a Sanskrit prayer, Khandana Bhava Bandhana, and then we have Om Rim Ritam, and then dedicated to the mother, Sarva Mangala Mangalye from the Chandi. It is not a composition, Swami Vivekananda's composition, but it was introduced at the end of the normal prayers, the Vesper services, Sarva Mangala. But in most of the temples, especially in Jairambati and also some other places, Prakritim Paramam also is sung. And it is sung, most of these hymns are set to tune by Swami Vivekananda himself, except Prakritim Paramam, which was written much later. But the other hymns, including Khandana Bhava Bandhana, was set to tune in Raga Mishra Kalyan, that is the rag which was used. And there are three different, you can see, layas, or maybe not laya, but the tala, as it is known. Tala means the tabla is played in three different types of beats. So the laya also changes. Khandana is sung in a very slow tempo in the beginning, and then it is repeated. The whole verse is repeated with double speed, and then we have the concluding verses. So, but this verse, which is dedicated to Holy Mother and which is sung in many of, at least if it is not sung daily, at least on Thursdays or some special day, it is sung in most of our centers. So the meaning of this is Prakritim Paramam. Now, what does this mean? We have to, because before we discuss the divine play or the divine birth of Sri Ma Sharda Devi, we have to understand how Swami Abhedananda is described in a nutshell the role Sri Ma Sharda Devi played in this divine play of Sri Ramakrishna and also her own divine play. So the ode Prakritim Paramam. Paramam means supreme divine mother. Prakriti is the divine mother or the divine Shakti. So Paramam means the supreme divine mother. Oh divine nature, nature, actually not mother, it's the divine nature. Oh divine nature supreme, that is the translation. Prakritim Paramam. Now what is her nature? She is a Parama Prakriti, who is the source of all Prakriti. So in her role as Prakritim Paramam, what does she do? Abhayam Varadam, one who gives boons. Varadam means giving boons. Abhayam means one who removes all kinds of fear. So the Bija mantra of Shakti, as I told you, the Anuswara of any Bija signifies or symbolizes the removal of sorrow. So when you say Om, Rim, Ritam, the Rim, the last word, Aim, Shreem, Kleem, every bija ends with a Anuswara. So that Anuswara removes all sorrow. Sorrows come from fear. If your fears are removed, all your sorrows are removed. Sorrows have their origin in some kind of deep-seated, deep-rooted fear. The chief fear being the fear of death. So Abhinivesha, as we discussed in our Rajoga class, Abhinivesha is the root fear which gives rise to smaller fears. So once you remove all the fears, then it enables us to remove all the sorrows. So directly or indirectly, this Prakritim Paramam, Parama Prakriti is responsible for removal of all our sorrows. Atyantika Dukkha Nivrutti. What are the kinds of sorrows? The gross sorrows, the mental sorrows, and the causal sorrows. The sorrows which are caused by our own nature. The samskaras, which give rise to thoughts, and the thoughts give rise to actions, and it affects the body-mind complex, and they give rise to sorrow. So if you go to the root cause, Parama Prakriti, she will remove all fears. So Abhayam Varadam, she is Abhayam, one who gives fearlessness, or who removes all fears, removes all sorrows. And she is the giver of boons. What are the kind of boons? She gives all types of boons. But we should have the wisdom to ask. So as you saw, there are so many Puranic stories. These demons or the asuras foolishly ask for things which ultimately destroy them. So she may be a giver of boons, but one should be wise enough. We should pray to her that let me ask for the right type of boon. Otherwise, she is ready to give everything. If a child cries for toys, mother will be pleased to give it. Only when he finds the toys useless, he grows up, the child grows up, he or she grows up, then they ask for higher toys. So she is in a position to give everything, Varadam. And finally she says, Nara Rupa Dharam Jana Tapa Haram. So nicely rhyme, there is a beautiful rhyme here. Prakritim Paramam, to Prakriti who is Parama. So this is addressed to Divine Mother or Holy Mother Sharda Devi. Abhayam Varadam, that is the second part, one who removes all fears and gives, who is a giver of boons. Nara Rupa Dharam, one who has taken Nara Rupa. Nara means human form, who has taken a human form. Though she is Parama Prakriti, she has taken a human form to remove all our fears and to give us boons, whatever we want. Jana Tapa Haram, who removes the miseries of humanity. So it's not just individual fears that she will remove, but the entire humanity. Whoever goes to her, she will come to remove, root out the source of the misery. So that is what Holy Mother does. So she is not only come in human form, Nara Rupa Dharam, Jana Tapaharam. Tapahara means, Tapa means Tapatraya. As I told you, three types of sorrows. They are also known as Tapa. So Tapatraya means to rescue us from all the Tapa literally means fire. So sorrow is compared to the scorching. When the fire scorches and burns everything around it. So also it scorches our heart. It scorches our mind. It scorches our entire life. So there's a burning sensation, not physical burning, but our whole mind, our whole personality feels the heat of the problems that we face. So one who removes the tapa means the heat caused by our ignorance. Tapa haram means one who removes. So she removes miseries caused by our own ignorance. Then what else does she do? In the second verse, Sharanagata Sevaka Tosha Kareem. One who confers, Tosha means Santosha. Santosha is happiness. So Tosha means also happiness. So Sharanagata Sevaka. To whom? Whose sorrows will she, to whom will she confer joy? Tosha Karim. Sharanagata Sevaka means one who have surrendered, who have taken refuge in her. If we take refuge in the Divine Mother, she will confer joy to us on those who seek refuge. To all those who seek refuge at her holy feet, they will be conferred with Santosha, Tosha Karim. Pranamami Param, Jananim Jagatam. I take refuge. Pranamami, I bow down to you. Pranamami. So Pranamamaha means I bow down to, we bow down to you. So sometimes if it is an individual prayer, in which case we say Pranamami means I. It is I who am bowing down to you because you are the Supreme Mother of the universe. Pranamami Param, Jananim, you are the great Supreme. Supreme means Param. Jananim, the Supreme Mother, Jagatam, of the universe. Jagat means the universe. So the whole meaning of this Prakritim Paramam, Abhayam Varadam, Nararupa Dharam, Janatapaharam, Sharanagata Sevakato Shakarim, Pranamami Param, Jananim Jagatam. So it means, O divine nature supreme, Prakritim Paramam, remover of all fears, giver of boons, who has taken a human form for our sake, who removes the miseries of humanity, who confers joy on those who take refuge in you, O Supreme Mother of the universe, I bow down to you. So the divine play, the second chapter of this wonderful book, begins with this prayer. Now we'll come to the life. We have a few minutes. We'll just try to find out what was the family background before we describe the wonderful circumstances which led to the divine birth of Sri Ma Sharada Devi. We'll try to find out what is the background of her biological parents. She was born, as we discussed, in a pious Brahmin family who were worshipping Shitala. There is a small temple of Shitala, so they were the priests. Her father was a priest. His name was Ramachandra Mukhopadhyay. Mukherjee, and Sri Ramakrishna's father was Khudiram Chattopadhyay. Upadhyay means they are Brahmins who normally who do worship in all these temples. They belong to a category of Brahmin. There are various categories also among Brahmins. Some of them only worship in temples. Some of them do some rites like cremation and other rites which these Brahmins don't do. So they are supposed to be of a, it's just a question of convenience that some Brahmins do not worship in the temple. They have other roles to play. And these people who are considered to be superior because they don't often do all these rituals after the birth of a child, and then other rituals they don't do. And the rule is because they have to be they have to follow a strict moral code. You can't just become a priest of a temple if you don't have the moral authority to do it. So what was the requirement? That they should not accept gifts from anyone. Whatever is offered to the deity, and they get some kind of salary from them, and they have to just maybe they just can't accept gifts. So performing other funeral rites and all, there the people for whom we are performing these rites, they often give gifts, but these temple priests were not supposed to. Now of course things have changed, but they are not supposed to take gifts from just anyone. Only special cases, when special offerings are made, they can accept, but not just anyone can come, and they would not accept. They held on to that moral principle. So that is the background of Ramchandra Mukhopadhyay. Was a devout, truthful and upright, just as Khudiram Chattopadhyay, Sri Ramakrishna's father. Ramchandra Mukhopadhyay also was, they are also known as Mukherjees, Ramchandra Mukherjee or Chatterjee. Chattopadhyay means Chatterjee, that is the short form, or they are known as Chattopadhyay. So now his Ramchandra Mukhopadhyay had three brothers, Trailokya, Mukhopadhyay, Ishwar and Nil Madhav. So there were three. Trailokya was a Sanskrit scholar, but he died in his youth. So one of the uncles of Sri Ma Sharda Devi, Ramchandra's brother, who was a great Sanskrit scholar, but he died at a very young age. Then the second one, Nil Madhav, was a bachelor. He never married. So Ishwar, who was the other brother, earned a very small amount of money by performing rituals in some homes in Calcutta. They may not have been funeral rituals, but some puja, priestly duties they were allowed to do in different families for a small amount of money. That is what Ishwar did, the brother of Rameshwar, a brother of Ramchandra Mukhopadhyay. And one was a bachelor, the other was a householder, but he lived he in some homes in Calcutta. He used to do all these pujas. But all the brothers lived together, and Sarada, the young girl, who grew up in a large extended family. That was very common in those days. And about her mother, it is said that Shama Sundari Devi was her name. She came from a Mazumdar family of Shihor. Shihor is the place which is also the birthplace of Hridayaram Mukhopadhyay, was a niece of Sri Ramakrishna. So maybe the families knew each other. So they belonged to the Mazumdar family, and Sarda's maternal grandfather was Hariprasad Mazumdar, who had 5 sons. We'll not go into the details. They were known as Tarak, Kedar, Shripati, Vaikunta, and they had 2 daughters, Sham Sundari, that is Holy Mother's mother, and Dayamai. Now, what was the nature of their parents? This was described by Sri Ma Sharda Devi herself, because you see the parents of both Sri Ramakrishna and Sri Ma Sharda Devi were very noble. So Ma Sharda later on described the nature of her parents, as we know about Khudiram and Chandramani Devi, the parents of Sri Ramakrishna, because he said many things about his parents. That is how Swami Shardanand, you had not obviously seen them, could gather so much of information about his parents. So similarly, Sri Ma Sharda Devi herself described, she says, my father was a righteous man, a sincere devotee of Ramchandra. Perhaps that's why he was named Ramchandra. So the family deity, though in the family they were worshipping in a Shitala temple, but As I said, their family deity was Sundar Narayana, and he was also a devotee of Rama, who is is an incarnation of Vishnu, of Narayana. He had such a good heart and such a amiable nature that anyone passing by his house, in those days, they used to sit, when they had leisure, they used to sit uh, outside the house. There would be some seat where, after hard days, hard work, they used to sit and smoke there. They used to smoke this hubble bubble. They used to prepare tobacco in their tobacco, and prepare the smoke and use the hubble bubble. So he enjoyed smoking that, and he used to sit there, and anybody who passed by used to offer, because many of the people were poor to afford all these things. So, or even people who are tired and just were passing through his house, though they were known, whether they were known or unknown, he was of such a nice, kind nature that he would invite them and ask them to just have a smoke before they left. And her mother, that is Shama Sundari Devi, was so kind and guileless. The Holy Mother herself says that she loved to feed people, and she also carefully managed each detail of the household and collected things that were necessary for the whole year. So Ramchandra had a wonderful wife who looked after all the needs of the children. And Holy Mother used to say, Holy Mother's mother, so Holy Mother is now quoting what her mother used to often say, that this household, this house of mine is for God and his devotees. So anybody who came to their house, they were treated like devotees of any devotee of God, or anybody where she had the same attitude of respect and love for these people as if they are devotees of God. Then Holy Mother says, describing the nature of her father and mother, she would say, she says, how could I have been born in a family if my father and mother had not practiced these religious austerities and led such a noble life? So it requires the biological parents also. Srima Sharda Devi felt that it is absolutely essential that incarnations are born in, if not rich families, but at least families which had absolutely noble parents. So also we find in Sri Ramakrishna, though they were very poor, financially not very rich, in fact they were driven out of the village because he refused to speak untruth. He was such a man of character, Kshudiram Chattopadhyay, the father of Sri Ramakrishna. So also the mother, Srima Sharda Devi's mother and father, they were so noble. Holy Mother herself says, otherwise how was it possible for me to be born in that family? So the birth of an avatara or a divine person is often associated with some kind of spiritual phenomena. So we'll just discuss this, and we'll take up some questions if they are there. For example, we all know that when Sri Ramakrishna's mother Chandramani Devi once she was standing in front of that Yogi Shiva temple, Jugi Shiva temple as it is known, it is still there, very near Sri Ramakrishna's house. So she was standing in front of that house, and she was surrounded by a strange light which emanated from that Shivalinga inside. And she strangely felt that she has conceived a child in her womb. So that was one of the reasons because her husband was away, and she told him when he came. At the same time, when she saw this divine light coming out of that Shiva temple, from that Shivalinga, and just surrounding her, and as it were, she felt that that light had entered her womb. At the same time, almost the same time, Sri Ramakrishna's father Kshudiram was in Gaya, and Lord Vishnu appeared there and said that he wanted to be born as his son. So he had a vision. He was surprised to know why is the Lord and how can he come and stay in my poor house. If the Lord himself comes, I'm not even prepared to serve him. I don't have the means to serve him. So he was a bit worried. So he was very happy. But he said, how can I take care of the Lord? I am struggling to even uh, look after my family. So the same thing we'll find in other Lord Vishnu appeared before him, and simultaneously, so they exchange. When he came back, he told Chandramani Devi about the vision he had. Then she also told him, I also had a dream. So this is how we find that in the lives of different avatars, the divine play, we see that there are some supernatural visions or incidents that precede the birth of these great avatars. Other examples we'll find in Ramchandra, in the life of Rama, Sri Rama. Kaushalya was, before she conceived Rama, it was some sacrificial cake was offered, big yagna was performed. And when she ate it, she suddenly found that uh, she would be conceiving somebody, and that was Sri Rama. So Lord Vishnu, you will see, herself gave a vision and entered the womb of Devaki, who was actually the biological mother of Krishna. And he was, of course, everybody knows, he was born in a prison because there was a divine voice which told his uncle, the brother of Kamsa, who was the brother of this Devaki, that the son of uh, Devaki will be he will kill you. I mean, you will be killed by him. So he wanted to destroy all the children. So he, just to ensure that all the children who are born to Devaki, his own sister, would be killed, he imprisoned, and Sri Krishna was born there. So in fact, she saw a vision where Vishnu himself came and said that I'll be born as your child. And then we know that Jesus was born of Virgin Mary, as angel Gabriel had foretold. That is a biblical story. So behind these great incarnations, you will find that there is a divine cause or a divine vision which precedes the birth. So there is a mystical event which is also associated with Srima Sharda Devi's birth, just like Sri Ramakrishna, Ramchandra and Jesus. You will find that there was a wonderful vision about which we will talk in our next class. That is when this thing happened in Shihor, when her family went to visit. Shama Sundari went to her father's house, which was in Shihor. There's a bale tree, and there was a beautiful vision she had, and she got a hint that a divine mother herself would be born as your daughter. So we will discuss about it in our next class. We'll discuss the divine birth of Srima Sharda Devi, and we'll take it up from there in our next class. Yes. So if there are some questions, you can just ask, otherwise. So we will be very soon, we will be starting the Aarti, the regular Aarti, and hopefully by Sri Ramakrishna's birthday, we would be having our regular Vespers, which we have now in a very small way. But before that, I intend to, because now all the classes are at 7. I could not conduct all the Vesper services because our classes used to be held from 5:30 to 6:30. But now, since we are having the daily class except on Saturday, so we can as well, because these 3 hymns, as I said, and also Prakritim Paramam, they are the hymns which are sung in all the centers. In some of our Western centers, of course, the English version alone is sung. The Khandana has a beautiful translation which was made by Swami Prabhavanandji and Christopher Isherwood, both of them together. It's not an exact literal translation, but we will, but it is useful for people who do not understand Bengali or Sanskrit. So the meaning is very important because it's the essence of that stotra or that arti, which is more important than uh, the 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 singing of the arti. Though no doubt it is set to music by Swami Vivekananda, and unless even Bengalis or even Indians find it difficult to understand the true meaning, then it doesn't serve its purpose unless the gist. So now and then we might, just as we discuss this Prakritim Paramam, the first verse, we sing it, but what's the use of singing it unless we know the meaning? So I will try to send the meaning of each verse of Kandana, Bhavabandhana, then the hymn of divinity, Prakritim, uh, uh, which is addressed to Sri Ramakrishna. And then we have Sarvamangala. Of course, all of them will be in English transcription, with English transcription. Om Rim Ritam Pamachalo, that is the second one, which is normally sung in all the different temples, Ramakrishna temples. So hopefully, to begin with, we'll have these sessions online, and at 6 o'clock, maybe for 20 minutes, those who like, they can attend the Aarti, where first the Khandana will be sung in a tune as Swami Vivekananda composed it, with the meaning in English just after that. Then the hymn to divinity, which Om Rim Ritam, and followed by Sarva Mangala Mangalya. And occasionally on Thursdays we can have Prakritim Paramam as well. So that is the plan. We do not know whether uh, we can do it. I mean, we will definitely try to see that it will be available only on Zoom, because it doesn't make sense to have all these things on YouTube live, because the same thing will be repeated every day. So very often those who can't attend every day, it doesn't make sense to just put it on YouTube live, the same thing over and over again, but it will be on Zoom. So we will be maybe from tomorrow, Wednesday, or maybe I'll announce it on WhatsApp. So people can, sitting in their houses, they can attend this Vesper service, because Swami Vivekananda himself introduced it. So I'll take your leave.